The Rebbe Zilchus began the Farbrengen this afternoon with a word she already mentioned in the Farbrengen of Achashul Pesach. The Rebbe says that this word is brought and it is related from Polish Svarim, from Polish Tzadikim. That they bring out that in a year like this year, we read Parsha Shemini 8 times. When the first day of Pesach comes out to be on a Shabbos like this year, it comes out that Parsha Shemini is read b'tzibur 8 times. If we include all the readings of Mincha afternoon, Shabbos Mincha, Monday and Thursday, and the 8th time, which was today, this morning, we have a total of 8 times that Parsha Shemini was read. And they teach as follows. Shmoina, Shmini, Shmeina. When you read 8 times Parsha Shmini, Shmoina, Shmini, then Shmeina, it is a fat year. What do we mean by fat? It means there's an abundance of bracha from the Rebbe in such a year. And as the Rebbe stressed throughout today's Farbrengen, that this is such an outstanding bracha, which the Rebbe is giving when the year comes out to be in such a way, that this bracha has to extend and has to hold out until we will have another such kviyas again, which is in a few years from now. And the inyan of Shmoina, regarding number 8, which this is the Vayhi Bayoyim Hashmini, the 8th day, and it's read 8 times. The inyan of Shemini has a tremendous significance. And as the Rebbe brought out, Bichlal we know, Sidis explains, there's an inyan of Shiva, a weekly cycle consists of 7 days. Shivas Yemei HaHekef. Whenever we want to stress something which is higher than the realm of nature, something which is higher than the madrega of a weekly cycle, this is brought out in number 8. So it is 8 which brings out, Mispar Shmeina brings out something which is yet higher than the regular cycle of nature. And here we say this is the whole mile of Parsha Shemini in general, and particularly this year when Parsha Shemini is read 8 times. Again, the number of 8. And as the Rebbe tied it in, the number of 8 also has to do with the inyan of Oz Yoshir. We say Oz Yoshir Moshe Bnei Yisrael. How does the Shira begin? Oz. What? Oz is also equivalent to 8. Aleph and Zayin equals 8. Which is right away is also a reminder on the Geula Hasidah, as Chazal interpret that why is the expression is Yoshir, not Shor. Shor would have been a past expression that Moshe Bnei Yisrael sang in the past when they crossed the sea. But the Torah rather prefers using the expression Yoshir, which is an expression Sai of past and Sai of future. And as Chazal interpret, this is an indication for Tchiyas HaMeisim min HaTorah. Excuse me, that a time will come again when it will be Yoshir, when Moshe Bnei Yisrael will be participating in the Shira. So again we have how the number of 8 reminds us on the whole inyan of Geula. Oz Yoshir Moshe Bnei Yisrael. Yoshir Loshen Osid. And as the Rebbe brought out, Bichlal the inyan of Ches. First of all, this year is the year of Tafshin Mem Ches. The Rebbe mentioned that Al Pi Halacha, when we write a legal document, so Al Pi Halacha we're supposed to write the year, that the date and year when we're writing this document. So for example, this year, it's 5,748. So the 5,000 we usually do away with. When we write the year, we don't always write, hey Tafshin Mem Ches, we usually write Tafshin Mem Ches. So the Rebbe mentioned that Al Pi Halacha, it's mentioned in Poskim, that if we could write the year by, for example, this year, by only referring to the Ches. In other words, and only mentioning the Ches. In other words, if it's clear in which cycle it is in. In other words, Meveisa Mahalt in this sequence of Mem Ches. Tavshim Mem Ches. If somebody should write only the Ches, and it'll be obvious that it's written this year, in other words, he's writing about something which has taken place this year, or something like it, then it is sufficient to write the Ches only. So what do we see? That the Ches is the Ikar Inyan of this year. Again, stressing the Inyan of letter Ches. Besides that, Ches reminds us on the Inyan of Chaim, of Lebedikait. As the Rebbe brought out, Bechlal, we're in a time and an era where we're trying to bring out every Inyan and tie it to the Hachai Yiten El Liboy. The Rebbe keeps on mentioning since the passing of the Rebbetzin, V'hachai Yiten El Liboy, that those alive have to take it to their hearts and search and look for ways how we could improve ourselves. And as the Rebbe added on, all of this has to be done mitoich simcha, from joy and happiness, midst of joy and happiness. So what does the Ches remind us? Ches reminds us an Chaim, an Chai, an Lebedikait. And as the Rebbe brought out, even though we participated in Farbrengens until now, and we had Farbrengens until now, but perhaps the Farbrengens that we had until now, we did not participate in these Farbrengens with the proper Lebedikait that is needed. And for those that did participate with the proper Lebedikait, the Lebedikait, Sheba Lebedikait, may have been lacking. So Mamela, now that we are in this special Shabbos, in the Shabbos of Ches times Ches, today is the 8th reading of Parashat Shemini, it's a proper time to increase in the Lebedikait that has to come hand in hand with the Chassidische Farbrengen. As the Rebbe added on, even though there are those that during a Farbrengen, even though they are being pushed, and even though there's singing taking place, and nonetheless, none of this stops them from sleeping and not paying attention to what's going on. But nonetheless, this is a proper Shabbos where we are to look for ways to increase our Lebedikait, and Lebedik Shebe Lebedikait, which this is what a Farbrengen has to have an impact on us, and in such way we have to participate in a Farbrengen. From here the Rebbe went over to mentioning that there's a minig by some that on Shabbos they learn the entire Masechta Shabbos in Mishnayos. All the Mishnahs of Masechta Shabbos. And if they can't learn it themselves, they divide it, they make a chalukah. The entire Masechta Shabbos consists of Chav Dalet Prokim, 24 Prokim. Tied it in, that's mentioned that there are 24 kishutim, there are 24 things which can beautify a kala. And this is really the whole inyan of Shabbos. Shabbos is also an inyan of beauty, an inyan of kshoit. We have the Sheishis Yimei HaMaaseh, the entire week. Then comes Shabbos afterwards. What is the inyan of Shabbos? Shabbos can be compared to a beauty which is just like there's the person, and there are things that beautify the person, that are added on to the person and add the beauty to the person. The same way is the Shabbos. The Shabbos adds beauty to the entire week, to the entire world. This is the basis of their minig to learn Masechta Shabbos, because Masechta Shabbos consists of 24 prakim, and 24 prakim remind us on the Chav Dalet Kishutin, the 24 ways of beautifying a kala, 24 different beauties which can be added on to beautify a kala. But referred it also that there's a pasuk, V'samti katked. Katked is also composed of the word Chav Dalet, twice Chav Dalet, which is also stressing the inyan of kishutim, of beauty, beautifying how one has to aim to beautify himself naturally in the spiritual sense. And here the Rebbe brought a Gemara. The Gemara says, Kshoit atzmecha v'achakach kshoit acheira. Gemara says, first we have to beautify ourselves, then we can beautify others. The Rebbe says that in previous sichas of the Rebbe, there's a very geschmack taich on this expression in Chazal. And the Rebbe keeps on demanding how we have such a responsibility to influence others. And here Chazal tell us, Kshoit atzmacha, first we have to beautify ourselves, and then we should beautify others. So the Rebbe teached it in previous years at many occasions. And actually, the diuk, the stress in Chazal, was along the same lines today. Chazal don't say, takin atzmacha, first correct yourself, and then correct others. But what Chazal, every word in Chazal is accurate. What do Chazal say? First beautify yourself, then you beautify somebody else. In other words, when we're talking about a madrega of kshoit, a madrega which is already considered a level of beauty, then we are told, kshoit atzmacha, v'achakach kshoit acher. However, when it's a question of taking, when it's a question of correcting, you see somebody does something wrong. Especially as the Rebbe keeps on stressing, now we are living in a time where whatever we have to chaparain, chatoifa achoil, chatoifa ishti, the Rebbe keeps on stressing, grab and eat, grab and drink. We're talking naturally about the spiritual food and spiritual eating and spiritual drinking. Now is a time, if it's a question of taking, we have to help somebody else. We see somebody is in need of assistance and spiritual guidance. We can't sit down and think, have I already corrected myself perfectly so that I can go out and correct somebody else? Not so. However, when we're talking about higher madregas, about a madrega of kshoit, so here we have to say kshoit atzmacha, we have to start from ourselves. First we have to know that all these inyonim are negeya us, and once we have accomplished it with ourselves, then we can go ahead and continue kshoit acher. The Rebbe continued that this Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorchim. We are benching the month of Iyar. In general, in Iyar we have Pesach Sheni, and Pesach Sheni, the message of Pesach Sheni is, as the Rebbe keeps on stressing, as is nicht doch kein Verfahren. It is never too late. That's the whole idea of Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is to help out the person who was not able to be makriv the Pesach Rishon. And why wasn't he able to be makriv the Pesach Rishon? Because he was b'derech rechoika, he was far away, meaning he was far away spiritually from Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim reflects the concept of Yireh Sholem, the highest level of God-fearing. Here we say, we're talking about somebody who was away from Yerushalayim. And together with it we also say he was tamei, meaning he was not in a position of entering the Beis HaMikdash. When one is tamei, he's not allowed to enter the Beis HaMikdash. And if we look carefully into the pasuk, where the pasuk discusses Pesach Sheni, we will notice that the pasuk says either one who was far, b'derech rechoika, or he was tamei lochem. So, see this teaches, he was tamei willingly. In other words, it was with his own desire that he was in a position that he wasn't able to be makriv the Pesach Rishon in time. And nonetheless, the Torah tells us that even for such a person, there's also a takana, there's room for him to rectify what he has missed out on. And this is the whole lesson of Pesach Sheni, as is nicht doch kein Verfahren. It is never too late. Together with this, the month of Iyar also has an abbreviation. Iyar is spelled Aleph Yud Yud Reish, which is an abbreviation, Ani Hashem Reifecha, that the Rebishter is the one who cures us, who heals us. And as the Rebbe kept on adding today, each time he mentioned it, that when the cure comes from the Rebishter, it is a different cure. It is a cure in such a... Curing is possible in two ways. It is possible that somebody is sick, and he's cured from his sickness. It is possible to cure a person in such a way, in a preventive way. In other words, that he's never even sick. He shouldn't have to come on to any sickness. The cure of the Rebishter is such, Ani Hashem Reifecha, the Rebishter is our Reife, in what way? In a way of Loi Osim Alecha Machla. The Rebishter will not put any sickness at all upon us. He will cure us in such a way that we will not have sickness. Not that we will be sick and have to be cured from that, but it will be in a yet higher madrege. Loi Osim Alecha Machla. The Rebishter will not put any machla, any sickness upon us. Besides all of these in Yom, the month of Iyar is referred to in Chumash as Chodesh Hasheni, the second month. And as the Rebbe mentioned, the names of the Jewish months, that this month is called Iyar, the next month is called Sivan, and so forth. So Chazal tell us, Shmois HaChadoshim Olu Imohem MiBavel. Where did the Yidden adopt these names? When the Yidden were in exile in Bavel, they came back with the names of the Jewish months. That's when these names were picked and set. However, the name that Iyar is Sheni and that Nisan is Rishon, this is something which we have in the Torah. In fact, in the reading of the Torah, which we read on the first day of Pesach, there we read, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodashim, that the month of Nisan is the first of all the months, and if Rishon is the first, Iyar is the second, as it's mentioned in the Torah, the Chodesh HaSheni, the second month, which refers to the month of Iyar. What is the inyan of first and second in Ruchnius? The Rebbe uses the expression in V'hacha yitein eliboy. In other words, in a lesson which we can take out from this whole inyan. So the Rebbe is bringing something to our attention. The month of Nisan is always Molei, which means the month of Nisan always has 30 days. Look into the Siddur before the text of Birchas HaChodesh. We will notice there it is listed. There are some months which always have 30. There are some months which always have 29, and there's some months that change and fluctuate. The month of Nisan always has 30 days. Therefore, the first day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar is a combination of Nisan and Iyar. How? Simple. It is still the 30th day in the month of Nisan. However, it is already the first day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. And the Rebbe here mentions also that there is halacha that when a document is written on this day, in order to spell out clearly the day that this document was written, when we want to stress the date, so we mention that this is Lamet Nisan, Aleph the Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So we're mentioning both months have a shaykhus to this day. That means that this day combines both of the months. And when we say Shabbos Mevorchim Iyar, the Shabbos Mevorchim is always still in the previous month. And it is this previous month that gives bracha to the oncoming month, to the month of Iyar. What is first and second? The Rebbe is continuing. So we see in Gashmias. In Gashmias we see, for example, that when a child or even an adult does something wrong the first time, so the first time doing something wrong, the child is criticized very strongly. And to the child itself, it's also something, the child feels that he has committed a serious crime. However, once this crime is already repeated, not the first time, it's the second time, it's the third time, then the severeness of this crime loses its effectiveness by the person who does it. He kind of like gets used to it, and it's kind of like taken for granted by him. So we see that there's a difference when something is committed the first time, or opposed when something is done second or third time. We find that this same idea we find in a different angle as well. We find this same minyan we find regarding Torah. Regarding Torah, we find the Rebbe is telling through Moshe Rabbeinu to Yidden that when Yidden are learning Torah, their attitude has to be that even though they have learned it already previous times, react to Torah as if this is the first time that you are learning it. Shelo yehei, an expression of Chazal, Shelo yehei kid yutke meyeshena. We shouldn't look at it like something old. Look at it like it's something new. Learn it with such an enthusiasm, with such an excitement, as if you're learning it the first time. From this we derive that when something is learned the first time, we react to it completely different. It creates a certain type of enthusiasm in the person, a certain type of, it's fresh, it's new to him. And who was cautioned on this? The generation that received the Torah from the Rebbe Har Sinai. Talking about a generation that was fortunate to hear directives directly from Moshe Rabbeinu. A generation that lived on man, were protected by the clouds. They had the water Mebeira Shel Miriam, from the well of Miriam. So this shows us what type of high-level spiritual people they were. And nonetheless, even these people had to be cautioned and had to be warned that when you're learning Torah, and you're learning Torah a second time or a third time, you should react to it as if it is the first time. What do we do? What do we see from this? From here we see that when something is done the first time, the excitement and the enthusiasm that comes with it is a complete different one than something which is repeated. This is the nature which the Rebbe has instilled into us people. What do we say now that we are going into the second month of the year, which is Iyar? We are getting the bracha from the first month. Birchas Shabbos Mevorchim Iyar is still in the month of Nisan. What does this mean? That when we are entering Iyar, we have to enter Iyar and bring along into Iyar the message of Nisan. Even though Iyar is the second month, but nonetheless we have to act in Iyar as if it would be the first. This is what the Rebbe brings out, that Nisan is called Chodesh Harishon. It's not called the Chodesh Echad. It's called the first in a sequence of a second and a third that follow it. It's not called like a single month. It's the first of a second. Memela was weist us that this is the first which is giving koyach and is showing us how we are to have our avodah. In the second month, it has to be similar to what we have in the first month, similar to what first stands for. Later in the Farbrengen, Rabbi also went back to the Indian of this week's Sedra. Sedra is Vayhi Bayoim Shemini. It was on the 8th day. The 8th day of what? Talking on the days when they had the dedication of the Mishkan. What came prior to the 8 days? Prior to the 8 days was 7 days. How are these 7 days called? So in Gemara and Rashi, quotes from Gemara, these days are called Shivas Yimei Hamiluyim. These were the days when special karbanos were brought, special instructions were given, how to dedicate the Mishkan. But the days are called Yimei Hamiluyim. Let us touch it up. It means full days. Days that are Mole. Mole means full. What do we see from this Indian? Even though we have just passed 7 full days, a person is not supposed to satisfy himself with that. And we are right away told that from such 7 outstanding days, Torah demands from us that a Yid has to go yet higher. Yet higher, Vayhi Bayoim Shemini. We have to enter the 8th day. As we mentioned earlier, that when we're talking 8 related to 7, it is a very big difference. In other words, Torah keeps on demanding that how much a person has achieved, he still has to go yet higher, Mailam B'Kodesh. And let us notice carefully, the Sedra begins Vayehi Bayoim Shemini, with a Vav before. What is the Vav? In Lashon HaKodesh it's called a Vav HaMechaber. It's a Vav that comes as a continuation to last week's, to the Sedra before that. The Sedra before that was Parshas Sav. And in Parshas Sav, it is discussed whatever has happened throughout the Shivas Yimei HaMiluyim. And here we are told, in a sense of Vav HaMechaber. In other words, there's no pause in between. There's no breakage, and there's no stoppage in between. Right away, from the Shivas Yimei HaMiluyim, to go yet higher, have to elevate ourselves to the Vayhi Bayoim Shemini. It's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe explains Rashi and also discusses a Rambam and brings from the Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, from the commentary of his father on the Zohar, and it is beginning from the Shabbos of after Pesach. We begin reciting Pirkei Avos. So the Rebbe also explains in Indian in Pirkei Avos in the Farbrengens of the summer months from Pesach until Rosh Hashanah. Let us go to the Rashi. In Parsha Shemini, the Torah describes what has happened with Nadav and Avihu. And it is in Kapitel Yud, Pasuk Hey, where before that the Torah tells us that Nadav and Avihu have passed away. Vayikrevu, vayisom, bikutonoisam, el mechutz lamachne. So the Torah tells us that Moshe called Mishael and Elzaphan, the children of Uziel, who were also related to Aaron, that they should carry out the bodies of Nadav Avihu. And the pasuk says, "Vayikrevu," they came close. Vayisom, and they picked them up, Yikutanoisam, by their shirts. On Mechutz Lamachne, Kashadiber Moshe, they followed the instruction of Moshe. And we look into Rashi. Rashi tells us, "Melamed shaloi nisrefu bigdeyim," comes to tell us that their clothes were not burnt. Elo nishmosam. It was only their soul that was burnt. And that is why they were able to be carried out by their shirts. If they were burned, how they were able to grab hold of their shirts? So Rashi is telling us their shirts were not burnt. What was burnt? Only their neshama. And Rashi goes on, Kimi shnei chutin shaleish, like two strings of fire, nichnesu l'toich mein, went into their nose, and that's how their soul was burnt. So it says we learned the pasuk Chumash, and even though this is Taki Gemara, but we know that Rashi sticks to his rule of explaining first and foremost Pshat. And Rashi doesn't even say that this is a drash or that this is taken from a medrash. Rashi is telling us this whole inyan on the level of Pshat. So the question is, what is not understood here in this pasuk that Rashi has to relate that something so unusual happened? This is very unusual. Normally we would learn that they passed away. So Rashi is telling us no, they weren't burnt. Only their neshamas were burnt, and their clothes remained whole and complete. Lo nisrefu bigdeyim, ela nishmasam. Rashi compares it, Kimishnei chutin shaleish, like two strings of fire, nichnasu l'toichet mein, that went into their nostrils. Something which we know that the Rebishter does not make any ness, something does not go out of the realm of nature unless there's a reason for it. We're learning the Pashat Pshat. Comes out that Nadav and Avihu were punished as an einish from Hashem, and that is why they were burnt. Why does Rashi have to get involved and portray their passing away that it should involve some sort of a ness, some sort of an unusual? Even though they were burnt, their clothes remained whole. And Rashi goes further that it is only their neshamas, their souls that were burnt, and also adding on that it was like two strings of fire going into their nostrils. So to explain this, Rebbe is learning as follows. Nadav and Avihu were involved in preparing the Ketores. So we know that normally when Ketores is prepared in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan prior to the Beis HaMikdash, it is set up in such a way that even though it is put on a fire, but nonetheless this fire does not eat up the pot, for example, which the Ketores is brought in. Why? Just like the Mizbeach had a constant fire. Nonetheless, this fire did not eat up the Mizbeach. Why? Because simply we see in Gashmias, there are certain things, certain objects which are eaten by fire, which are destroyed by fire. Ha'esh nerchaz behen, fire catches on it. And there are certain objects which fire does not catch on. What's happening here? The Bnei Aaron, Nadav Avihu, did something wrong while they were korvasam eish zara lefnei Hashem. While they were makriv Ketores, they did something wrong in the process of being makriv the Ketores. The Ketores normally is brought through fire. A fire is needed to burn Ketores. The child who's learning Chumash and is up to Parsha Shemini has already learned that by the Rebishter there is an inyan that when the Rebishter punishes, it is in a way of midah keneged midah. The same way one sins, he is repaid, he is punished along the same line. Memela, if they did something wrong in the procedure of being makriv Ketores, which is through fire, and the Rebishter is punishing them, so the Rebishter is punishing them also through fire. It's only appropriate that it should come in such a way, it should come in a way of midah keneged midah. However, their clothes did not sin. On the contrary, bigdei kahuna are something which is l'kavod l'sefaros. The clothing which is worn by a kohen, by kohenim, as there's a description previously in the pasuk in the psukim, clothing worn by Kohanim is to add beauty and honor to the Avodah. The Mele, there is no reason that the clothing which Nadav and Avihu wore, that should be burnt. However, being that they sinned, Nishmasam was burnt. Reason Rashi adds on, Kimin Shnei Chutin Shaleish, that went into Nichnasu L'Toichet Mei and went into their nostrils. The Rebbe says is also understood. Why? The whole inyan of Karbanis, as we keep on hearing in Chumash, is that Karbanis should create a Reach Nichoyach L'Hashem, a good odor to the Rebbe. Does it mean a good odor? So we all know what Chazal interpret, that Reach Nichoyach Nachas Ruach Lefonai Shamarti V'Nasa Retzoni. It causes a satisfaction by the Rebbe that his will, his wish is fulfilled. But still, nonetheless, the pasuk uses the expression Reach Nechoyach. It should bring a good odor, an odor of satisfaction to the Rebbe. Being that the Ketores which Nadav Avihu brought did not lead to a Reach Nechoyach, to a Nachas Ruach, to a satisfaction by the Rebbe, but on the contrary, it caused anger by Hashem, because they did not, as the pasuk says, "Ba'akrivam eish zara lifnei Hashem, ve'akrivam lifnei Hashem eish zara asher lo yitziva isam." That is why their punishment was how that shnei chutin shaleish, 2 strings of fire, went into their nostrils, to bring out the idea that they did not accomplish an inyan of reach nichoyach, an odor. An odor, a person smells through his nose. And reach nichoyach is usually, how does one have a satisfaction of a reach? It is through the nose. By them, however, being that their ketores did not cause nachas ruach reach nichoyach l'Hashem, nachas ruach to the Rebbe, but it angered the Rebbe. So first of all, the Rebbe punished them. In what way? Also through fire that burnt nishmasam, burnt their souls. And then how was it expressed? That it went through, like shnei chutin shaleish, through 2 strings of fire, went into their chaitim, went through their nostrils, to bring out the idea that their kolben was the contrary of a nachas ruach, of a reach nichoyach l'Hashem. This is how the Rebbe is learning this pasuk. Regarding the inyan of commentary of the Rebbe's father on the Zohar, so there's a Pasha Shemini that he brings out. The Rebbe's father, besides being a genius in Kabbalah, an unusual genius in Kabbalah, he was also very unusual in Gematriyahus, in numerical values. It's also a derech in Torah to explain in Yonim al pi Gematriya. Take the numeric value, every letter has what it stands for, or we multiply it, or however it works out, as we will see in a minute. And he explained in Yonim al pi Chassidus and al pi Kabbalah, however it was all based on Gematria, based on the method of looking at the numeric value of the word. And it is in this week's Sedra where he discusses the inyan of Yitzchak, our father Yitzchak Avinu, and he brings out that Yitzchak is begematria 8 times Shem Havaya. If you were to multiply Shem Havaya 8 times, it will come to the same total as Yitzchak. And then the Rebbe explained in the inyan also, but he also mentioned that when we're talking about inyan of Yitzchak, it is also the name of his father. The author of this parish, his name was Reb Levi Yitzchak. So on one hand, it's the inyan of Yitzchak, 8 times Shem Havaya, and on the other hand, it's also the inyan of Levi. What's the inyan of Levi? We find in Chumash, when was Levi named Levi? When Leah expressed herself after she had the 3rd child, she said, Hapam yilove ishi elai. Now that she already blessed her husband with 3 children, her husband will associate with her, will be attached with her. So thus, what does this bring out? When she had the firstborn, she named him Reuven. Reuven is an inyan of Re'iyah. After Reuven, seeing. After seeing, she gave birth to the second child, and she named him Shimon. Shimon based on Shama Hashem. The Rebishter has heard of her problems, and that is why the Rebishter has blessed her with a child. First she said the Rebishter saw her problem. Now the Rebishter heard her problem. After seeing and hearing, what do we come to? A Yetaya Madrege? That's the union of Levi. Levi accomplishes a real association. When did she feel that her husband Yaakov will really associate with her? That is after she gave birth to the third child. So what's the union of Levi? Levi brings out Yilove Ishi Elai, the union of attachment, the union of getting close to the Rebishter. This is expressed, attaching in a Ruchnis now, this is expressed in the word Levi. In the Rambam, Shiurim of Rambam based on 3 Perkim a day, Shiurim now deal with the union of Kahuna. The Rambam there explains that there are various levels by Kahuna. It brings out the idea that there is a concept of a Kohen Meyuches, which means a Kohen that we are definite that he's a Kohen, and we know exactly who he stems from. He traces back his Yiches all the way back. That's the meaning of a Kohen Meyuches. Rabbi is explaining really the whole concept of a Kohen really applies to every Yid. There's a Rambam, famous Rambam, the Rebbe quotes very often, and explained it today as well. Rambam tells us that the concept of Shevet Levi spiritually does not only refer to those who are physical descendants of the tribe of Levi. But the Rambam goes on and says, anybody whose heart volunteers to serve the Rebishter, this person can be considered a member of Levi. Why? What's the whole union of Levi? The members of Shevet Levi, Sai the Koyanim and Sai Leviim, they were servants of Hashem. So the Rambam is saying that today anybody that Nodva Liboy, that his heart volunteers, as the Rebbe added on, it's from the heart, the famous expression, Liba Polig Lekulu Shaifin. Often the heart carries the blood to all parts of the body. The same thing here. This decision, this desire is carried. The person doesn't only remain in one's heart; it affects his entire body. That he wants to be la'amodu l'shareis as Hashem, to serve the Rebishter. So what are we told? That the person that has this dedication to the Rebishter is considered a member of Levi. Is considered a member of Shevet Levi. So this is bringing out. The Rambam is discussing various levels in Kahuna. Same thing is when we're talking in the spiritual union of Kahuna. In this union of one being a spiritual member of the Shevet Levi, there's also various levels, until we come to the highest of all these levels, which is naturally a Kohen Gadol. There's even a Chazal that says that every Yid can achieve even this Madrega as well, and naturally we're talking spiritually. That's the union of today's Shia Rambam, how every person can become a member of Shevet Levi. It's really accessible to everybody. How? When one makes his decision, is to stand and serve Hashem just like the members of Levi. Regarding Pirkei Avos, that today is the first of the Pirkei Avos, which we said today after Mincha. Rebbe brings to our attention that before Pirkei Avos, we always say an introduction. And the introduction is Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelek Leilam Haba. That every Jew, Kol Yisrael, has his share in Leilam Haba. So brought out today that when we look through Chazal, we will notice that when Chazal discuss the relationship between a Yid and Leilam Haba, there are various expressions. There's the expression which we have here, Kol Yisrael Yeshlam Chelek Leilam Haba. That everybody has a share in Eilam Haba. Chelek means a part of Eilam Haba. It's brought in Halacha that when we're talking about a Chelek, it means at least a quarter, 25%. That's an interpretation of Chelek. Then we find different expressions in Chazal. There's an expression in Chazal about a person being a Ben Eilam Haba, a son of Eilam Haba. Also meaning he will be awarded Eilam Haba. We also have an expression, one who is mizumen l'chaye olam haba. He is reserved his deeds are such that he is reserved for Olam Haba. It leads him into Olam Haba. Naturally, when we're talking in Chazal, every expression is accurate. It's not that sometimes this one is used or sometimes another one is used. This Mishnah here is talking about Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek Olam Haba. How every Yid has a shaykhus to Olam Haba. Mitzad himself, mitzad his birth. In other words, Kol Yisrael. He was born as a Yid. Every Yid is Neitzer Matoi. Every Yid is the fruit of Hashem. Mainse Yodai. Created by Hashem. So every Yid, from birth, regardless what he does, is in the position that he is worthy to be, to have a chelik lo ilam haba. That is in other words, this is like the first madrega of ilam haba. This every Yid has a shaykhus to, regardless of his avodah. Then, the avodah of the Yid, however, is to gain more and more ilam haba. So then he goes to higher madrega. Then he comes to a madrega when he becomes a ben ilam haba. Afterwards he becomes mizumen lachaya ilam haba. But the initial level of ilam haba, this is something which every Yid has a shaykhus to. Once a Yid gets involved in his avodah, which this we read about in the Perek of Pirkei Avos, beginning with Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, until he fulfills the Midu Talmidim Harbe, that he puts up many Talmidim, he puts up many students. And what type of students? Proper students. Students that, here the Rebbe brought an expression, it's an expression from the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe was talking about, the Alter Rebbe had, it's related in Friedrich Rebbe Siches that the Alter Rebbe had students, disciples, around him. They were divided in Chadarim. It was like Cheder Aleph, Cheder Beis, and Cheder Gimel. And it is this, and some were fit to be members of the first group of students, a second group, and a third group. The Friedrich Rebbe describes in his Siches what were the requirements from the Alter Rebbe's disciples for the various three stages of like a koilels, which we had, if we should use today's terminology. And the Friedrich Rebbe describes how they had to be fluent in all of Shas and Bavli and Yerushalmi and all of Rambam and all the four parts of Shulchan Aruch, and have a basic knowledge of Kabbalah and Zayar and no Midrashim. And after all this was like kind of the basic knowledge. And after that, there were different groups, those that went into Cheder Aleph, Cheder Beis, and Cheder Gimel. Not getting into this now, the Rebbe just referred to an expression from the Alter Rebbe regarding his disciples, where he said, he applied an expression, Zutre de Bechu, the smallest of them, the youngest of them, could be in a position of being Mechayim Mesim. Rebbe says, what does this mean? There's an expression in the Zohar, Man de nofal midargei ikrim mis. One who falls off his madrege is considered meis, he's considered that he died of Chmanulson. A person who's not striving higher, but on the contrary, he's going lower, this is an Indian of Misa, spiritual death. What is the obligation? To put up such type of disciples that should be in a position not to let anybody die, to be able to be Mechayim Mason. What do we mean in the spiritual sense? To put up such type of disciples that they should see to it that nobody should fall down from his madrege. Here the Rebbe went into an Indian, and he says there are those of us that learned in Temchet Mimim and received the Chassidish Chinuch and know very well what is how valuable and how dear and how important it is to daven ba'arichas and to sit down before davening and think in Inyan Chassidus, and nonetheless being out of Temchet Mimim for years, and maybe talking about some people who were very successful in Gashmiyas, and being that they were successful in Gashmiyas, they are doing wonderful things with their money. They are supporting many meisters, and they are doing really outstanding in Yana. But at the same time, this does not relieve them that they should remind themselves the type of chinuch they received in Temchet Mimim, and what this chinuch demands. There's a famous kunteres, of Mam, which was written by the Rebbe Rashab, the founder of Temchet Mimim, which is called Kunteres HaAvodah. And there the Rebbe Rashab describes at length how he wants a Tamim to daven. what is demanded from Tmimim, how the davening of a Tamim should be. Or the Rebbe says even those that did not excel as Zvulns, but there are those amongst us that excelled as Yisachas. There's Zvul means those people who are successful in business, and at the same time they're giving a lot of stock and doing a lot of wonderful things. But again, they're obligated to remind themselves on what Timchet Mimim is demanding to really daven in the proper way. To take off time and think in Chassidus, which this is the type of davening Timchet Mimim wants from us. Or again, those who were successful in Yisachah, meaning they put up tremendous institutions, and the Taka was successful in the Midu Talmidim Harbe. The Taka was successful in putting up this union of what the Mishnah tells us, Midu Talmidim Harbe put up many students, and they were successful in this area. But nonetheless, from them it is also demanded to sit down before davening and reintrachten sich in an union of Chassidus, which this is what type of chinuch they received, and to live up to it even many years after being out of yeshiva as well. The Rebbe concluded this whole inyan. We conclude Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos has the opening Mishnah of Kol Yisrael, and what is the closing Mishnah of Reb Hananya ben Akashya? What does Reb Hananya ben Akashya say? Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos es Yisrael. The Rebbe wanted to merit Yidden. What did he do? He gave them an abundance of Torah and mitzvahs. He says, imagine the Rebbe, with how many inyanim the Rebbe has. The Rebbe has so much. How great the Rebbe is. What is the Rebbe's concern? What is Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What is the dear to the Rebbe? Was vernemt not? What takes priority by the Rebbe? What does he want? L'zakos es Yisrael. Simply to be mezake Yidden, to merit Yidden. And how? By the fact that Yidden should have hirba lahem Torah mitzvahs. Yidden should have an abundance of Torah mitzvahs. And this is something which the Rebbe is kind of like taking out time out of his busy schedule and whatever the Rebbe has. And nonetheless, what is the priority by the Rebbe? The Rebbe hirba lahem Torah mitzvahs. L'zakos es Yisrael, that Yidden should have a ribuy of Torah mitzvahs. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that being that we are entering the summer months, so it's an appropriate time to remind on all of the mitzvahim that are related to the summer, and all of the inyanim. Mentioned it in Dachish al Pesach Farbrengen as well, to see to it that children during the summer months are registered in kosher camps, and all other inyanim that are appropriate to utilize the summer on. We should make sure now is a proper time to make sure that all the inyanim of the summer are utilized properly.